Welcome back to every Digimon RPG wrong series. Digimon Data Squad is an interesting beast, but one that I found severely lacking. It's a stripped down JRPG, which is quite rough around the edges and seems like it has shit sporadically thrown throughout the world with no real thought or effort put into it. All the maps are tiny, and if it weren't for the obscene load times, bloated combat, and gigantic encounter rate, you'd struggle to find even 5 hours of content here. With all of the accompanying bloat and a bit of a cheeky grind to explore more of the Digivolution tree, I barely managed to hit 20 hours. For all you long-time viewers of my Digimon series, for the first time ever, you'll be happy to know that the opening cutscene represents the game accurately. I never thought I'd see the day that a Digimon game had a relevant opening cinematic, but it's finally happened, lads. We fucking made it. While idling on the title screen, a rotating roster of maps are panned over in the background. I quite like this, as it feels as though I'm experiencing something new every time I turn the game on, and as minor a feature as it is, it made my experience a bit more tolerable with some visual variety. I did complain before about Data Squad being stripped down, but in many ways it works to its benefit. One of the most noticeable is the lack of exposition and general time wasting when it comes to establishing a premise. The opening scene barely feels like an RPG beginning at all, as you're immediately thrust into gameplay. The story elements take a back seat, as what little narrative there is drip-fed to the player. It features all of the big reveals of a typical anime narrative, but without any of the punch or tiptoeing around the obvious twists. To sum it up, you and a bunch of chums work for an organization who disposes of bad Digimon. These so-called evildoers are never shown doing anything worthy of a harsh beating, but we gotta beat someone. It also happens that a bunch of children have gone missing, suspected to have been kidnapped and taken to the digital world. Turns out they were actually the bad Digimon the whole time and were transformed into these creatures inspired by the 7 deadly sins. I thought there was something a bit off about a child becoming the physical embodiment of lust and then being beaten by a bunch of adults, but my uncle said it was okay, so. You eventually find all the children, and then some science guy betrays you by unsealing the ultimate evil, and you teach him why nerds should stick to masturbating and equations, cue credits. It's simple, it does the job, and it's hilariously bad. Most of the exposition is delivered over this plain office-looking background, with voiceover accompanying the text and portraits. I was surprised with the complete lack of anything else happening over this scene, as the story events that take place within the 3D environments have models moving around and alternating camera angles. Because when you've got shit moving around, it makes it feel like things are happening in the game, even if the animation is rudimentary and stiff. The portraits in these scenes are also quite odd, as half of them are flat 2D images and the other half are still shots of a character model. The voice acting suffered a similar fate, as it's one of those so bad it's hilarious deals. Post-battle conversations take place where the characters spew nonsensical garbage, and the writing is just awful.
I want to eat Mom's cooking.
Hey, stop calling my mom by her name!
It's so bad that I'm pretty sure the word Digimon was spoken at one point. It seems as though Data Squad was a victim of either budget or time constraints more than anything, but another area this somewhat worked to its benefit is in the mission and stage design. You're given roughly 10 objectives to complete throughout the course of the game, and each one drops you in a new area with a new antagonist to defeat. Because of the brevity of the story, there's never a requirement to revisit previous maps, and there's a good sense of forward motion to the game, as you're never in any particular area for too long. The levels do feel empty, however, and rarely consist of more than a few hallways, a handful of switches masquerading as a puzzle, and a big bad at the end. If it weren't for the severe random encounter rate, you could move from one side of any given map to the other in about a minute. Certain stages are tight and awkward due to the lack of real camera controls. You can zoom in and out, but the perspective is fixed and foreground objects can mask paths, which comes across as more of an oversight than intentional. There was one stage which really stood out, and that was Sea Precipice Girapolis, some of these fucking names. It's an outside area with rotating platforms and elevators connecting 4 different tiers to one another. It was the only thing close to a decent stage, and while it was far from a puzzle, you can tell that a decent effort was put in to make it really stand out. It also requires that you go out of your way to explore when collecting all the treasure chests, which is something I genuinely appreciate in JRPGs. Exploration isn't a thing you'll be required to do too much, as stages are fairly linear, but key items such as Digi-Eggs are hidden in random chests, so the few times Data Squad asks you to go out of your way, it's best to do so. There are a handful of side quests which you can only discover by exploring, so there is incentive to return to each map at least once, but it's far from necessary, as it's largely just fighting powerful Digimon. Granted, these powerful Digimon are an interesting addition, but to fully understand why, we gotta talk combat. As you've probably guessed, combat is turn-based and not too different from previous entries in the series. Where Data Squad really distinguishes itself is the design of combat, both in execution as well as the visual elements. When you are gifted with the boon of a random encounter, you'll notice that there's a collection of ugly, intrusive hexagons filling the screen. Well, that's the user interface this time around, and it represents what action your Digimon wants to perform based on a bunch of invisible stats you can manipulate but have no way of telling to what degree they've been changed. One of my big gripes with this is that you can only access the abilities shown in these hexagons, even if the monster knows far more useful techniques, which may not be displayed because feelings. Say I'm getting sick of battles and I simply want to flee. I have to bank on the fact that my monster's such a sad, depressed pussy that he'll want to run away. You can't simply select it unless there are hexagons on the screen allowing you to do so. To add to that, the frequency of the abilities shown dictates how badly your monster wishes to perform that action, and going against that decreases your friendship. As far as I could see, friendship was really only for 1 or 2 Digivolution trees, and there were far better ways to manage it, but it's still fucking stupid. There's a support menu you can always access, in which you can use items and such descriptive commands as tighten, loose, really tighten, and really loose. Remember ladies, do your kegels every day if you want a strong ass pussy. Since the hexagons often fill the screen, there's no room left for the health of your Digimon, and it's been relegated to a secondary menu. This now becomes a direct conflict where critical information is hidden so that your screen can be invaded by fucking hexagons. I find this odd as there's an ideal fix for the issue contained within the game. There's an item which displays all the commands your Digimon knows and neatly aligns them next to one another. The item doesn't work as a replacement for a real overhaul, as it takes a turn to use and is expendable and expensive to buy, but the way it lays out attacks is so uncluttered and lovely. It would also allow for the player's health to be displayed on screen at all times, so it would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If the emotion system really has to stay, then you could simply put like a yellow highlight around the command the Digimon wish to use, and that wouldn't change the core functionality in any way, but would simply declutter the screen, which I think needs to happen. Another issue I have with this combat system is that there's no real difference between any of the Digimon's attacks. Other than an occasional attack which targets all Digimon, they seem to do the same amount of damage and are completely interchangeable, so it's easier to just let them do whatever they want anyway. This means that random encounters as well as boss fights consist of spamming X for the most part, and no real thought is necessary. Even if you were to attempt to apply thought, the Hexagon system's so heavy-handed with the moves it wants you to use, the best option just ends up plastered all over the fucking screen anyway. To be fair, there are a handful of fights where spamming the X button didn't work, but most of them were the optional, powerful Digimon. Quite a bit of strategy can be applied with buffs and debuffs, but Data Squad isn't remotely close to a balanced game, so you simply end up steamrolling the enemy in the 2 instances you'll ever use your fucking brain. It also pulls some shit where it takes a good 2 to 3 seconds between turns, because for some fucking reason, it does a sweeping shot of the entire battlefield after every single move. So battles are pretty shit, but you know what else they fucked? Digivolution! Look, it's significantly better than whatever 4 attempted, but it still sucks. You can move around these constellation Digivolution trees by meeting certain requirements. When the requirements are met, you can only trigger the evolution from within battle by using Digisoul Charge, which will see your character punch an enemy, dealing damage, and then cue the transformation. If that hit kills the enemy, then you're unable to transform until you can find a Digimon who can take a punch. It's just more bloat. I don't think I need to say anything about that really, it's just fucking retarded, right? Some of the requirements are ridiculous, some are redundant, but most are just grindy. They largely consist of kill X many of Y-type Digimon, or have a certain stat at a certain number, which are largely fine, but the game's so short that it's tough to hit a lot of them. There's also requirements for having a certain amount of currency, or fleeing from a battle a certain amount of times, which sucks a huge dick when you can't freely flee whenever you wish. Some are just poorly thought out as well, as one specific Digimon has 2 separate requirements, one being have 10,000 currency and the other being have 100,000 currency. Believe it or not, having 100,000 currency means you also have... Look, a good designer will minimize redundancies where they can, and enough about that I think. Just a brief mention of the soundtrack. I enjoyed some of the battle music, and it has that typical Digimon catch to it, but there's one track in the game, I don't remember which one it was, but it genuinely sounded like there were cats fucking in the background, and that cracked me up. The final thing I want to touch on is, funnily enough, the final boss. The fight itself is what shat me off, as I thought I had to grind because his health pool is massive, but it turns out that you just win when he gets to half health. The game slowed down on the final hit, and the screen went white. I thought the game crashed, but no, it was just a shitty ending. You also get experience from killing him, but you can't continue on afterwards, and all you get from beating the game is a very brief cutscene performed in-engine, and then a 2-second still of all the main character models after the credits. I'm fucking glad I did that, because it was worth it! So that's Digimon Data Squad. Why it was ever released is an enigma, and I feel sorry for anyone who bought this expecting a worthwhile experience, but that's how I feel about most Digimon games, so whatever. Everything about it screams underdeveloped and barely finished. From the awkward animation featured in the barren cutscenes to the cats fucking in the background of a fight, it lacks polish and any semblance of depth. The load times are a killer, the encounter rate is high enough to kill Tommy Chong, and I never once felt like I was contributing to it in any meaningful way. It's a boring, dull slog through uninspired terrain and a shitty story, but it's pretty short for a JRPG, so at least there's that. While it does unintentionally benefit from some of these shortcomings, I'd struggle to praise that as a positive thing. Next time on Digiman, I'll be doing Dusk and Dawn. If you want 2 separate videos, or if you want me to just combine the 2, let me know, if you even still give a fuck, because I mean I don't. As always, I've been Casp with the Sore Ass, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.